Alright, YouTube, it's time for the Occult video 109, Occultism being at odds with Leftism, especially fiscally. I think sometimes people don't understand this. Now, interesting interplay here before I sort of delve into the topic at large. I had a self-proclaimed Marxist quite some time ago, I think about 2 years ago actually, try to convince me that Satanism and nouveau occultism, as modern occultism, were specifically designed by people who hated communism, wanted to destroy it, and were a bunch of corporate capitalists or something of that nature. I've also had people lately try to tell me, based on largely Abrahamic satanic panic era works that they've read, that no, indeed, the occult is a form of Marxism. Now, occultism goes back to far antiquity, to the literal origins of modern man. Sort of archaic Homo sapien times or even Neanderthal times, so it has nothing to do with modern political systems in an absolute sense. It didn't really co-evolve with those until fairly modern in human terms. But at the same time, the philosophical aspect of most occultism does not align with leftism as it's held today. Maybe leftism as it was held in the 50s or the 60s or something that was fiscally unremarkable, as in being no really different from any capitalistic system or quasi-capitalistic system, but at the same time was socially progressive insofar as it realized the capabilities and aptitude of all human beings being on a roughly equal keel. That is, people within secular systems should be seen as equal, as akin, so that they have equality of possibility. Now, communism also states equality of outcome, and so does modern progressivism, which is really just a variant of communism when you think about it in that sense. Maybe not completely in a fiscal sense. It's more about the state absorbing more of people's money and delving it out in welfare forms or something about that. So supposedly that's progressivism. I don't quite understand how that's a good thing, but that's what some people unfortunately believe in. But insofar as as the occult stresses individuality, it's certainly at odds with the modern ethos of leftism, which is essentially individuality is bad. Everyone should be seen as a group insofar as nations go, and in some cases they go further. They argue for the essential erasure of national borders and the establishment of human homogeneity. I would say that's directly at odds with most traditional systems within the occult. The idea of the individual is important. Where there's a collective at all, it's within a philosophical school. It's within a variant of ethical thought. It has nothing to do with individual action beyond a rudimentary sense of morality. If you look at some of the Renaissance era materials, certainly you can see this at work. The occult, insofar as most modern systems go, post sort of might is right, would fit in somewhat with objectivism, with the Ayn Rand sort of material in some cases. But you've got to realize Satanism being based on that. Satanism is not an occult form. LaVeyan Satanism is a form of atheism, strictly speaking, or agnosticism. It stresses no literal belief in a devil. It stresses no literal belief in actual supernatural forces or magic as the occult would ascribe it. It's a mock-up. The rituals they perform are mockeries of the Catholic Mass. They are psychological ritualism at most. They have nothing to do with literal demons. LaVeyan Satanism, when people try to say Satanism is worship of Satan, I laugh at them because they know absolutely nothing. Satanism, as it is ascribed by most Satanists, is strictly atheistic. It's understood to be atheistic. The higher-ups call it atheistic. In public view, on their Facebook page and everything else, in their books and everything else. The lay Satanists call it atheistic. They say, oh, belief in the devil is screwy, it's weird, it's nonsensical. There are satanic orders that are theistic. They too deviate from leftism. In fact, most of them go far, far right. They're either literal conservatives, as opposed to maybe neocons. They're nationalists of some variant or another, generally not leftist nationalists. Or they're outright racial nationalists. They sort of segue into the pagan ideology, paganism. Another great example, a great many pagans are civic or racial nationalists. They believe in tribal identity or something. I would point out To people that are so worried about white pagan nationalism, like in Scandinavia, or among any American tradition or something like that, why don't you aim the same criticism at Native Americans who want to stick to their racial identity, their tribal identity, to their cultural and linguistic identity, have their own land, and practice racial paganism? There's no difference between the two, except that you've been trained to see a difference between the two. No, leftism has nothing to offer the occult. The occult stresses that you must be an individual, you must be a master, you must enlighten yourself, and you must question things. Modern leftism is no different from right-wing ideology, so-called a few decades ago, in that it stresses that there are some absolutes that cannot be questioned. So, 90s era conservatism. You can't question the supremacy of Jesus. You can't question that drugs are inherently evil, will kill you, and should be banned. We should kill anybody who uses them. The government should be run by Jesus Christ. Jesus is the President of the United States, essentially. Things that were unquestionable. You weren't allowed to question these things, or else you were an outcast, socially and fiscally. You were not part of the core culture. Now, a couple decades later, it's flipped on its head. The reigning ethos now is you can't question climate change is real. If you don't agree, then you're a Neanderthal. Guns are bad. We need to do more to regulate them because reasons. We're a completely secular nation. There's no place for organized religion in the civic square. Killing is invariably wrong, including in some of these people's minds in self-defense. Yes, we need more welfare. We need more redistribution. People should mix it up, blend up, and be more diverse and multicultural. We want unlimited immigration, stuff like that. If you question this, the result is about the same as if you questioned Jesus 20 years ago. So some time ago, or even 10 years ago, when I was first an atheist, fresh out of sort of high school, early college years, it was extremely unpopular, even on the internet, to voice that opinion that you did not believe in the Christian God. Especially since the internet hadn't yet branched out into many pagan cultures of the world, or the Islamic world for the most part. So it was almost entirely Christians outside of maybe Japanese or South Korean users or something like that. It was extremely religious. Other than some of the Scandinavian nations, there weren't really any Western nations where secularization had fully taken hold. It was a very unpopular opinion. Now, it's a fairly popular opinion. There's still a lot of bitterness and fighting going on, but it's an acceptable opinion. The idea that you don't believe in the Christian God is no longer reacted to with utter bile, the way it was before. Likewise, now, though, you have a different situation where a literalistic, fundamentalist belief in the Christian God is reacted to that way. The occult stands in this gap and laughs at both sides, perhaps, and says these people need to do what they need to do, what they feel is right, but they need to question things. They don't need to be unquestioningly obedient to any government, to any perceived authority figure or real authority figure, to any dogmatic system. They need to question things. They should experiment in their ritualism. They should learn about history. They should learn about science. They should question everything. Even science now tells you not to question certain things that it takes as dogmatic truth. It did this in the past too. 50 years ago, if you said, well, I don't think there's enough evidence to say that homosexuality is a brain disorder that should be treated with electroshock, they probably would have given you electroshock because they would have thought that you would become a lunatic or something. Now, of course, it's on its head. Now they say, within so-called modern civilized science, if you question climate change or something else, then you're the same lunatic. They won't give you electroshock, but they will try to blackmail you. Or rather blacklist you to keep you from working anywhere or something like that. It's very strange to see human hypocrisy in action. But modern leftism, which stresses group identity on a racial basis just as much as any right-wing ideology, only it takes the opposite token away from what that actually means, that teaches people that there are certain things about themselves that they have to hate, is really no different. The reigning world ethos of the West today is no different from how it was in the burning times. They just disagree on who the modern day witches are. The modern day witch is somebody who is religiously Christian or extremely right-wing or tribalistic or believes in national or racial identity. That's the modern day witch that's being hunted today. They even have sort of their own Malleus Maleficarum in the opinions, really, their own Hexenhammer, in the opinions of some of the academics of the world today. If you really think about it, and just think about it for a while and look at what some of these people are writing, especially within the lame brain media, the legacy media, about their foes, about their adversaries. It's the same burning times. It never went away. And the witch trials are still here, only now instead of hanging people literally, they hang their jobs, their careers out to dry or something like that. Or they cyberbully, they harass them all day. And it's tolerated, oddly enough, when they do this. It's very funny to watch, but the occult doesn't have this facet to it. The occult is about exploration, about stretching forth your mind and questioning things. About, you got to study history. You're not going to be able, when people tell me, oh, well, Podesta's an occultist, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. I study history. I'm studying it from these actual sources. You haven't. You read some book that some idiot Christian pastor wrote 20 years ago about how Satanists were taking over the world, and you think that makes you knowledgeable about what magic is. It's laughable. You don't know anything about these subjects. I wouldn't climb into your pulpit and start telling you how to interpret the Bible that you so obviously literally believe in, but you would climb behind my robe, I suppose, as you could term it, and proceed to lecture me on what the occult means. That's not the way that it works. You're not going to make any headway trying to debate me on topics you obviously haven't studied from more than one or two sources. At most, you've read the Bible, okay, and the Bible is where you get your view of the occult from. But most of what you think you know about the Bible is just the interpretation of some pastor from the last half century or so. Again, you completely miss the mark. The occult cannot coexist with authoritarian thought. It's enlightenment. The Enlightenment in the West, which led to most of the good things that we still enjoy, slowly denigrating over time with absolutism, moralism, and identity politics. But the rudiments of the Enlightenment are still burning just as bright as ever. They're just sort of veiled over. The candle has been covered with the basket, or something like that. That Enlightenment was occultism. The Enlightenment period, most of what they were talking about building their philosophies off of were their interpretations of antiquated mystery schools and Bible stories that they began to rationalize and things like that. They had great respect for Rome, for Greece. You look at the American system of government that for a while was vastly superior to anything else. Now it's sort of more a European-style oligarchy, unfortunately. But in its origins, was literally premised on the concept of fusing, I guess, the Greek democratic system with the literal Republic of Rome. Very, very funny that people think that it had something to do with Judeo-Christian zeal, because it didn't. You're thinking of the Puritans that come earlier. You're thinking of the pre-United States period when you're talking about such things. I wonder if people understand that. I wonder if they understand that a lot of our founders were Masons, which means they were, indeed monotheists. They believed in like the Judeo-Christian God, but in a mystery school kind of way. The Masons aren't devil worshippers either. You ask them what they think of Lucifer, they'll say that they love Lucifer. What's Lucifer? If you understand anything about how the Bible was mistranslated, they're talking about Jesus Christ. You think they're talking about Satan. That's your first problem. When people come to me and tell me about Masonic conspiracies and Bohemian Grove and all, that's a bunch of nonsense. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by a bunch of people that haven't studied these things from any original text, like the kind that I edit on a literally daily basis. I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by somebody who thinks in terms of, literally, the fire and brimstone period of maybe mid-19th century Americana or something like that. I'll study that too. And it's very funny, you don't even know what the origins of your own cult-like mentality are. In many cases, you're taking it from literal snake oil salesmen who happened to be stump preachers at that era, wrote some books, influenced lay Christianity, and perpetuated it through just as many pastors and priests throughout time. That's the origins of your generally Protestant, not so much. I'll spar with the Catholics too, but their cult changes more slowly over time because it's reliant upon the Pope to make these decisions or some cardinal. It's very funny. Their religion's been almost entirely inverted within the last couple of years. Their Pope is a literal Marxist. They don't even realize that either. They think, oh, it's so progressive and diverse and tolerant. Well, your Pope would have been called an anti-Pope and burned at the stake a couple centuries ago. You need to keep that in mind. Wonder why your God keeps changing his mind all the time. Just like the leftist God does. The leftist God of science, so to speak, and I say leftist again, in a relative sense. Classical liberalism is libertarianism, basically, after a sort. It has nothing in common with today's leftism, so-called. Today's leftism isn't socially progressive so much as socially authoritarian. They just don't realize it. They want to smoke their weed, but they certainly don't want to leave people alone to their own devices. They want more and more of their money. Not seeing how that has anything in common with the early wave of liberals. Yeah, those people can't be an occultist and believe that you should enslave all of mankind to some sort of crazy Marxist collective. It just doesn't work that way. You wouldn't have an occult. You wouldn't have any enlightenment because people would be completely enslaved all the time. An enslaved body, an enslaved mind, and an enslaved mentality about the reality around them. They wouldn't investigate anything. What would be the point? They wouldn't make any profit on it. Capitalism is much more occult than socialism will ever be. You may not want to recognize it, but again, read some of these texts. Read what the encouragements there are to stretch forth your mind, to shun authoritarianism. The Luciferian ethos is very much, even if you're not an occultist, Luciferian. The rudiments of the occult are still there, essentially speaking. So yeah, just thought I'd talk a little bit about leftism and the occult. People need to understand, because I have people saying, oh, the occult has something to do with communism. No, it doesn't. It predates communism by thousands of years. What are you talking about? It has nothing to do with that. You're talking about texts sometimes in pre-Gnosticism age. They're several thousand years old. We're talking about incantations and rituals that go back as far as Sumeria some of the time, or ancient Egypt. There weren't any communists back then. The ideology itself hadn't been born backwards and half aborted through Marx's asshole yet. That's about all. Peace out.